My name is Claire Whitlock. I'm 32, and I held my grandfather's hand the night he died. 6 weeks I never told my family about. At his funeral, the lawyer read one line for me. The mountain cabin, 3 hours north. My stepmother smiled sweetly. He left you the cabin. Go live there. My father stared at his shoes like a coward. My stepsister leaned in so close, I felt her breath. Go live with the rats up there. That rotting shack is exactly where trash like you belongs. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I took the key and drove up that same night into 19 degrees of freezing darkness with no streetlights. They thought they'd finally thrown away the family's burden for good. They thought my silence meant I had lost everything. They had no idea what my grandfather had pried up the floorboards to hide. 1 month later, the woman who threw me out called me 36 times before sunrise. And that was the moment their entire world started to collapse. If you've ever sat in a room full of family and felt like the only stranger in it, do me a small favor before I go on. Tap subscribe. It's free, and it tells me you want to hear how this ends. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from. The city, the hour, whatever the night looks like where you are. I read them. I'm Claire. Let me take you back to the week of the funeral, where all of this started. The funeral home smelled like lilies and floor wax, the way those places always do. Like someone scrubbed grief into the carpet and tried to cover it with flowers. I sat in the second row because the first was already taken. Lorraine had claimed it. My stepmother, 56, in a black wool coat I'd never seen. Her hair set the way she set it for church. My father, Glenn, sat beside her with his hands folded between his knees. My stepsister, Brittany, sat on his other side, scrolling her phone under the program. I had been the one in the room when Walter died. Not them. I never told them I'd taken leave from the hospital. I never told them about the 6 weeks. I just showed up to the funeral like everyone else, and nobody asked where I'd been. The lawyer's name was Mr. Hollis. He read the will in a small voice, the way you read something you'd rather not. The house went to Glenn. The accounts, what was left of them, to Lorraine, in recognition of her care. A watch to Brittany. Then he found my name on the page. To my granddaughter Claire, he read, the cabin on Tamarack Ridge. That was the whole line. 3 hours north. 1 sentence. Lorraine turned in her seat and smiled at me. Not a cruel smile. Worse, a sweet one, the kind you'd give a child who'd brought home a finger painting. He left you the cabin, she said. Go live there. Glenn looked at his shoes. Brittany leaned across the aisle until I could feel her breath on my ear. Go live with the rats up there, she whispered. That rotting shack is exactly where trash like you belongs. I didn't cry. I'd learned a long time ago that tears in that family were a currency, and the exchange rate was cruel. I reached out and took the key from Mr. Hollis's hand. It was an old brass key, heavier than it looked, with a paper tag tied to it by a loop of kitchen string. On the tag, in Walter's blocky hand, were 2 words I didn't understand. I closed my fist around it before anyone could ask. You have to understand who I was to that family to understand why none of them blinked. I was the useful one, the one who drove people to appointments. The one who fixed Lorraine's printer and filled out Glenn's insurance forms and remembered which pills Walter took with food. For most of my life, I had believed that if I was useful enough, careful enough, indispensable enough, the love would come. That it was a thing you earned, like over time. It never came. I just got better at the work. There's a memory I keep, because it explains all of them. I was 19, home from my first year of nursing school, and Lorraine threw a dinner for Brittany's college acceptance. I spent the afternoon cooking it. I plated everything and washed every pan, and when the guests arrived, I was still in the kitchen in an apron, and Lorraine introduced Brittany to the room and never said my name once. Later, scraping plates at the sink, I heard her tell a neighbor, "Claire's so good in the kitchen. We don't know what we'd do without her." It was meant as a compliment. That was the part that took me years to understand. In that family, being needed and being loved were two different countries, and I had a lifetime visa to the wrong one. So I learned the only citizenship they offered. I became indispensable. I told myself indispensable was close enough. I started visiting Walter alone after my grandmother Ruth died 8 years before. He lived in the big house then, the one Glenn got. Lorraine had married into the family late and folded herself into it like she'd always been there, and one of the first things she did was take over the household. The bills, the calendar, the medicine. "If you've got time to sit with him," she told me once, finding me in his room with a deck of cards, "you've got time to be useful in the kitchen." I went to the kitchen. I always went to the kitchen. But I kept coming back to his room, and Walter kept letting me in. And somewhere in there, we became the kind of close that doesn't announce itself. He taught me to play cribbage. He told me about the cabin he'd built on Tamarack Ridge in his 30s, board by board, before any of us were born. And one afternoon near the end, when his hands had started to shake and his words came slower, he gripped my wrist with surprising strength and said something I filed away as confusion. "Check the floor when the cold comes in." I thought he was drifting. I squeezed his hand and told him I would. I didn't think about it again for almost a year. The thing that should have warned me, the thing I keep turning over now, happened maybe 4 months before he died. I came by to drop off a prescription and found him at the dining table holding a sheet of paper. There was a notary stamp at the bottom of it, blue and official. "What's this, Walter?" I asked. He stared at it, like it was written in another language. "I don't remember signing that," he said. Lorraine swept in from the hall and took the paper out of his hands so smoothly, it was like a magic trick. "You signed it last month, sweetheart. We did it together." She smiled at me. He gets confused. He didn't seem confused to me. He seemed sure. But I was the useful one, not the suspicious one. So I let it go. I noticed other things and let those go too. How the pillboxes kept getting reorganized by Lorraine, and how Walter seemed worse every time they were. How a home health nurse came twice and then stopped coming. And when I asked about her, Lorraine said the agency wasn't a good fit. I was a nurse. I knew what good fits looked like. I let it go anyway, because letting things go was the only way I knew how to stay in the family at all. I have spent a long time being angry at the woman who let those things go. I've made my peace with her. She did the best she could with a wound she didn't know she had. Then came the last 6 weeks. Walter went down fast in the fall. Lorraine called it a decline, the way you describe weather. I took unpaid leave from the ICU and moved into his room and didn't tell anyone, because the part of me that still believed in the family was afraid they'd find a way to make even that a competition. So it was me. Through the long nights when his breathing changed and the monitor I'd brought from a medical supply store ticked its small electronic heartbeat into the dark. Me, holding a cup to his lips. Me, reading him the box scores because he liked the sound of numbers. There were good hours in those 6 weeks. People don't tell you that. They tell you about the suffering, and they leave out the cribbage games we still played when his hands could hold the cards. The way he'd cheat and grin and dare me to call it. They leave out the afternoon light coming through the blinds in stripes across the blanket while he slept, and how I'd just sit there and let him, glad to be the one allowed in the room. I have done this work for strangers 100 times. I know how to keep my voice level and my hands steady at a bedside. With him, it was different. With him, my hands were steady and my chest was not. Twice during those weeks, Lorraine called the house line. Both times she asked whether Walter had said anything about his affairs. Not how he was. Not whether he was in pain. Whether he'd said anything about his affairs. I told her no, and hung up and stood in the hallway, with my hand still on the phone for a long time. On the last night, near 3 a.m, he was lucid for a few minutes, the way the dying sometimes are, a candle flaring before it goes. He looked at me for a long moment. "You never asked me for anything," he said. That's how I knew. I didn't know what he meant. I told him to rest. He closed his eyes, and a little while later, the monitor changed its tune, and then there was only the sound of the furnace and my own breathing in a house that suddenly felt enormous. I drove up the mountain that night, believing I'd been handed the family's garbage. I was wrong about almost everything. The drive north was 140 miles of black road and the temperature falling the whole way. I watched it drop on the dashboard like a countdown. 31, 26, 22. The big warm house behind me shrank in the rear view until the porch light was just a dot, and then it was nothing. And there was only the high beams and the trees leaning in and the white line. Before I'd left, Brittany had followed me to the car with her arms crossed against the cold. "Don't forget to write," she'd called, "if the rats can read." I hadn't answered. I'd put the brass key in the cup holder where I could see it. The last 20 minutes were dirt and switchbacks, the cabin somewhere above me in the dark. When the road finally leveled out and my headlights swung across the clearing, they caught something I didn't expect. A figure on the porch. He was a big man in a canvas coat, stamping his feet against the cold, and for 1 second, my whole body went tight. Then he lifted a hand, unhurried, and I saw the stack of split firewood at his feet and the thermos under his arm. "You'd be Claire," he said when I rolled the window down. "Earl Brandt. We're up the next ridge." He nodded at the cabin like it was a mutual friend. "Walter said you'd come. The door sticks in the cold. Lift the handle and push." I lifted the handle and pushed. The door gave with a groan, and behind it, the cabin breathed out air colder than the night. There was a heavy iron deadbolt on the inside of that door. I noticed it the way you notice things you'll need later. Earl set the firewood by the stove and showed me how the flue worked and told me his wife Nadine had left a casserole on the step, and then he was gone. Taillights bouncing down the switchbacks, and I was alone in my grandfather's cabin in 19 degrees of freezing darkness. I built a fire with hands that didn't want to work. I found the casserole, still warm in its towel. And as the room slowly came up to something like livable, I saw it. In the middle of the floor, one board sat higher than the others. They thought they'd thrown me to the bottom of something. They didn't know Walter had left me a way up. For a month, nobody called. I want you to sit with that, because I had to. Not Glenn, my own father, not Lorraine, who'd smiled and told me to go live there. 30 days and the phone stayed dark. I almost messaged him once. I got as far as Dad, before I deleted it. There's a particular kind of cold that has nothing to do with weather, the cold of being unmissed, and the cabin taught me about it that month. One night, about 2 weeks in, I came close to breaking. I had the phone in my hand and his name on the screen, and my thumb over the call button, and I'd built the whole conversation in my head. I'd be warm. I'd be the bigger person. I'd say something that made it easy for him to come back to me. That was the old reflex, the indispensable one. If I just made myself useful enough, easy enough, lovable enough, he'd remember he had a daughter up here in the dark. I sat with my thumb over that button for what felt like an hour. Then I put the phone face down on the table and let the fire burn down and didn't pick it up again. It was the first time in my life I'd chosen the cold over the begging. It didn't feel like strength yet. It just felt like the bleeding had finally found a place to clot. So I worked. I am, at my core, someone who works when she's hurting. I caulked the windows. I split wood until my shoulders ached. I cleaned 40 years of wood smoke off the walls and found Walter everywhere. His fishing rods, his cribbage board, a coffee can of bent nails he could never throw away. The Brants checked on me. Nadine would appear with bread or stew and stay for coffee, and she talked about Walter like he was a person and not an estate to be divided. "He talked about you," she said one morning, both hands around her mug. "Said you were the honest one." I had to look at the fire for a second. Then she said something that turned the whole month sideways. "He was up here all last fall, alone, spent days at it." She paused. "Had a crowbar with him. We figured he was fixing the floor." The floor. I'd been avoiding that board the way you avoid a sore tooth. But that night, after Nadine left, I got down on my knees in front of it with Walter's crowbar in my hand and his voice in my head, clear as the day he said it. "Check the floor when the cold comes in." The nails were new. That was the first thing I saw up close. Bright, unrusted nail heads in a board, surrounded by 40 years of dark old iron. Someone had pried this board up recently and nailed it back down. An old man with a crowbar, alone, last fall. I worked the bar under the edge. The board came up with a shriek of nails. Underneath, set into the gap between the joists, was the cold corner of a metal box. It was a fireproof document box, the gray kind you buy at an office store, and it was heavier than it should have been. I lifted it out and set it on the table by the lamp and just looked at it for a while. My hands weren't quite steady. I told myself it was the cold. There was a brass clasp, not locked. Inside, on top of everything, was a folded sheet of paper with my name on it in Walter's hand. I opened it. "You came," it said. "They never would. W." I sat down. I don't remember deciding to. The chair was just suddenly underneath me, and I was holding a dead man's handwriting. And the thing I'd been carrying for a month, the not being called, the smile, the rats, cracked open in my chest, and I pressed the back of my hand to my mouth and held very still until it passed. He'd known. He'd known none of them would make the drive. He'd known the only person who'd ever lift that board was the one who'd actually come. Underneath the note was a stack of documents. The top one was a will, and the date on it was newer than the one Mr. Hollis had read at the funeral. I'm a nurse. I read fast, and I don't panic, and I made myself read everything in order, because the next page was a sticky note in the same blocky hand. "Play the files in order," it said. "Don't skip." The will under the note was dated the previous October, 3 weeks before the version read at the funeral. It was signed, witnessed by 2 names I didn't recognize, and notarized. It left the house, the accounts, and everything else not to Lorraine, but to me, to be managed honestly, as she has always done everything. The will Hollis read at the funeral was dated 3 weeks after this one. I'm not a lawyer. But I have filled out enough hospital paperwork to understand one thing instantly. A man does not get more clear-headed as he's dying. The later a document, the easier it is to argue he didn't understand it. This one, the real one, came first, when he was still sharp enough to drive up a mountain with a crowbar and hide it. Beneath the wills was a thick, spiral notebook, the kind kids use for school. And beneath that, a small black USB drive in a plastic sleeve. I plugged the drive into the old laptop on Walter's desk. There was a folder of audio files, numbered. I clicked the first one. His voice came out of the speakers, steady and dry, filling the cabin like he was standing in it. "If you're hearing this, I'm gone, and she's already lying." For a moment, I couldn't move. It was his voice, not the thin, slowed voice of the last months, but Walter, the real one, the cribbage cheating one, recorded back when he still had all his words and had decided to spend them on this. The fire ticked, the lamp threw its small circle. Outside, the cold leaned on the windows the way it had every night since I'd come, and inside, an old man who had been dead a month was talking to me from a desk 3 feet away. I put my hand flat on the table to steady it. Then I reached up, slowly, and turned the volume higher. And I let him keep going. He'd waited a long time to be heard. The least I could do was listen to all of it. I turned up the volume and listened to my grandfather, dead a month, start to tell me exactly how. The garbage they'd thrown away turned out to be the family's black box. The second file was not Walter's voice. It was Lorraine's. The recording was muddy, the way a phone sounds in a pocket, but the words were clear enough. Walter must have set it recording and left it on the table. "Sign it, Walter." Lorraine's voice, patient, coaxing. "You'll only lose it otherwise. The state takes everything if you don't plan. Sign it for me, for the family." A long pause. Then Walter, slower, confused in a way that made my jaw tighten. "I already have a will." "That one's no good anymore, sweetheart. We talked about this. You don't remember because you're tired. Here, right here." I had to stand up and walk to the window. It was full dark outside, and my own reflection looked back at me, and behind it, the black shapes of the trees. I made myself breathe, then I sat back down and opened the notebook. It was a ledger. Walter's handwriting, getting shakier as the pages went on, tracking his own accounts like a man watching water drain out of a tub he couldn't plug. The first entries, 2 years back, a retirement account, $311,000. The last entry, dated the spring before he died, $4,200. Some of that gap was honest living, groceries, heat, the slow cost of being old. The rest, $280,000, had moved out in pieces over 3 years. Each line had a note in Walter's hand. Transfer, L. Transfer, L. Check to L's account. Page after page of it, a slow bleed dressed up as care. The genius of it, if you can call it that, was the size of the pieces. Never a big round number that would make a bank flinch. 6,000 here, 9,200 there. Amount small enough to look like an old man managing his own life. She hadn't robbed him. She'd metabolized him, a little at a time, the way a slow illness takes a body, so gradually that on any given day you could tell yourself nothing was wrong. And in the margins, in pencil, Walter had done a thing that broke my heart in a clean, quiet way. He'd been checking her math. An old man, losing his words, sitting alone at a table, adding up the columns to prove to himself he wasn't crazy. Tiny pencil sums in a shaking hand. He'd known. He'd known for a long time, and he'd kept the receipts the only way he had left. And then, near the back, one line that wasn't a transfer at all. It was the name of a pharmacy. I read that line 3 times. A pharmacy didn't belong in a ledger of stolen money. It belonged in my world, the world of charts and refills and the careful arithmetic of keeping an old body running. So I put on my nurse's eyes and went looking. There were pharmacy printouts folded into the back of the notebook. Walter had requested his own records, the way patients are allowed to. I spread them on the table under the lamp. The refill dates were wrong. I knew what Walter had been prescribed. I'd filled his weekly box 100 times. The printouts showed those medications being refilled on schedule, picked up, paid for. But the dates told the story of a man who was stable, managed, fine. He hadn't been fine. He'd been declining hard, the kind of decline I'd watched up close for 6 weeks. A managed patient on the right medications, taken correctly, does not fall the way Walter fell. Either the medications weren't reaching him, or they weren't what the label said. I thought about the home health nurse who'd come twice and then never again. I thought about the pill boxes Lorraine kept reorganizing. I thought about how Walter got worse, every single time. My stomach dropped, slow, like an elevator with the cable cut. I did what I always do when something matters. I photographed every page. Then, I backed the photos up to 2 places. The way you learn to in a hospital, where a lost record can be a lost life. It was an old habit. I had no idea yet how much it would matter. I knew I was past the edge of what I could handle alone. I needed someone who understood the law the way I understood a failing heart. I found her the next morning, Eleanor Vance, an elder law attorney 2 towns over, the kind with a small office and a long wait list. I told her 60 seconds of it on the phone, and she went quiet, and then she said, "Bring the originals, all of them. Don't mail anything, don't scan anything to anyone but me." A pause. "If that power of attorney is forged," Eleanor said, "everything she did with it unwinds. Every dollar. Bring the box." I drove down with the box on the passenger seat, buckled in like a person. What I didn't understand yet was that I'd stopped being forgettable the moment I moved into that cabin. In a town that size, word travels, and the word that found the wrong ear was a simple one. Walter's granddaughter had settled in up on Tamarack Ridge. In the cabin, the old man had spent all last fall working on, alone, with a crowbar. Lorraine had searched the house, the storage unit, everything but the one place she'd never once thought to look. That night, the phone rang. Then it rang again. Then it didn't stop. By the time the sky started to gray, my screen said 36 missed calls, all from the same name. Lorraine. Quick question, because I need to know I'm not the only one who's lived a version of this. When you realized the people who threw you out suddenly wanted you back, was it ever because they missed you? Or was it always because they needed something? Tell me below. A or B? I have a feeling I already know. The voicemails were a study in a woman losing her grip one message at a time. The first was Honey. "Sweetheart, it's Lorraine. Your father's worried sick about you up there all alone. Call me back. We just want to talk about Grandpa's things. Make sure nothing got lost in the move." The fourth was cooler. "Claire, I really do need to hear from you. There are documents that belong to the family, and they need to come back." The last one, time-stamped just before dawn, had no honey left in it at all. "You don't understand what you're playing with. Call me before you do something you'll regret." I didn't call. I forwarded all 36 to Eleanor and sat with my coffee and watched the sun come up over a ridge my grandfather had loved. And for the first time in a month, I didn't feel like the burden anyone had thrown away. I felt like the person holding the box. Eleanor's office had 2 chairs, a wall of books, and a window that looked out on a parking lot. She read for 40 minutes without speaking. She laid the 2 wills side by side and tapped the dates. She turned the ledger pages slowly, and when she got to the pharmacy line, her finger stopped. "Here's how this goes," she said finally. "There are 2 fights, and they're different animals. The will is 1 fight. That's probate, that's a courtroom. That's whose paper wins. The money she moved while he was alive, with a power of attorney that I am betting he never validly signed. That's the other fight. That one's not just civil. Forging an instrument to drain an elderly man's accounts is a crime." She took off her glasses. "We don't ambush her," she said. "That's the mistake everyone wants to make. We let her commit to her story first, on the record, in front of people who matter. Then we put the truth down on the table and we don't say a word more than we have to." "And the pharmacy?" I asked. Eleanor looked at me for a moment. "You're the nurse. You tell me what you think it means. Then we hand it to someone whose whole job is finding out." She didn't bill me for that first meeting. When I tried to pay, she waved it off. "This is the kind I don't bill for," she said, and put the box in her safe, and gave me a receipt for it in her own handwriting, like the box was a person too. A few days later, she called. A detective named Paul Brennan, from the Financial Crimes Unit, the one who worked the cases where the victims were old, wanted to meet me. We met in Eleanor's office. Brennan listened to all of it, without writing much down, which I learned later was its own kind of test. He was watching whether my story stayed the same shape when I told it slow as when I told it fast. It did, Because it was true, and because I'd kept records the way I keep everything. Most of these, he said when I finished, die for lack of a witness. The victim's gone, the money's gone, the family doesn't want to know, and the one person who suspected didn't keep anything. He nodded at the box on Eleanor's desk. Your grandfather kept everything, dated, sourced in his own hand, and then you photographed it and backed it up twice before you ever called a lawyer. He almost smiled. You two made my job possible. That almost never happens. Then he told me the part that mattered, and he told it plainly so I wouldn't get my hopes too high. The forgery and the theft, those were solid. Paper doesn't lie, and a handwriting examiner had already flagged the signature on the power of attorney. The medications were harder, without a body to examine, and Walter had been cremated, the way Lorraine had arranged so quickly that even that, now, looked like something. The most they could likely prove was the switching and the neglect, not what it had cost him in the end. I can build you a case that puts the theft on the record and the abuse beside it, Brennan said. What I probably can't do is prove she shortened his life. I want you to hear that from me now, not from a courtroom later. He held my eyes. Can you live with the difference? I thought about it honestly. I can live with the truth being smaller than what happened, I said. I can't live with it being buried. Good answer, he said. That's the only kind that holds up. There's a town under the mountain, and that town remembered my grandfather. While Eleanor built her file, the town quietly rebuilt my days. The man at the hardware store wouldn't let me pay full price for a new flue pipe once he learned whose cabin it was for. Walter ran a tab here for 40 years and never once stiffed me, he said, ringing up half. Call it the family rate. The Brants came by on weekends, and Earl helped me shore up the porch steps, and Nadine kept feeding me like it was her job. It undid something in me, that kindness, in a way the cruelty never could. Cruelty I knew how to brace against. I'd had a lifetime of practice. But a stranger charging me half for a flue pipe because my grandfather had been an honest man. I had to sit in my truck in the hardware store lot for a minute before I could drive. I had spent 30 years believing I had to earn every good thing handed to me. These people kept handing me good things for nothing, and the only thing they seemed to want in return was for me to let them. One afternoon, watching Earl drive a nail with 2 clean strokes, Nadine handed me a photograph. It was Walter, younger, standing in front of the cabin with a fish in one hand and a beer in the other, grinning at whoever held the camera. He gave us that years ago, she said. Thought you should have it now. She squeezed my arm. Whatever she did down there, and we can all see she did something. This town saw the real Walter. Don't you forget, there were people up here who knew exactly who he was. I put the photograph on the mantel where I could see it from the table. I was standing there looking at it when I heard a car downshifting on the switchbacks. Through the window, climbing the dirt road toward the cabin, came a silver sedan I knew. Lorraine had stopped calling. She'd come to do it in person. She knocked like a guest. That was the thing that almost made me laugh. The polite little knock, 3 taps after 36 calls and a month of silence. I opened the door, but not the screen. The iron deadbolt sat in its slot beside my hand. Claire? She'd dressed for it, the wool coat, the church hair. You look thin. Are you eating? She tried to see past me into the cabin. May I come in? It's freezing. You can say it from there, I said. Something flickered across her face, surprised that the useful one had a no in her. She recovered fast. I'll be honest with you, sweetheart, because we're family. She folded her hands. Your grandfather wasn't well at the end. He hid things, moved things, made a mess of his own affairs. I moved his money for his own good, to protect it, to keep the state from taking it. You'll understand when you're older. There are papers up here that belong to the family. I just need you to give them back, and then all of this goes away. In my coat pocket, my phone was recording. It had been since I saw the silver car. I want you to understand the choice I made standing in that doorway, because it would have been so easy to make the other one. The old reflex was right there, warm and familiar. Smooth it over, make peace, hand her something so the cold would stop. Part of me, the part that had carried plates out of that kitchen for 30 years, actually wanted to. Giving people what they demanded was the only way I'd ever bought my way toward being loved. I stood very still and let the reflex pass through me like a wave and break against the door. "What papers?" I asked. "The ones from the box, Claire." Her voice tightened. "Don't be slow. The box under the floor. Those papers are family business and they need to come home with me today." I kept my face still. "How do you know about a box under the floor?" The smallest pause. Then, because I went through his things. All of them. The house, the storage unit, everything. Looking for that will. The real one. The one that gives everything to me. The one he must have written before he got confused. She caught herself a half-second too late. Before someone confused him. There it was. She had just told me she'd searched his entire life for a will she knew existed, a will that gave everything to me, and she'd called the one read at the funeral the work of a confused man, which is exactly what it was, because she'd stood over him while he signed it. I let the silence sit. "Get off my porch, Lorraine," I said quietly. She tried tears next. They came fast and on cue, the way they always had at family dinners when she wanted the table to turn against whoever had crossed her. "After everything I did for this family," she said, dabbing, "I cared for that man for years." "I have it on a recording," I said. "Everything you just said. Go home." The tears stopped like a faucet, for one bare second, before the coat and the hair and the church voice came back up over it. I saw the face underneath, and it was doing arithmetic. She turned and walked to her car without another word. I closed the door. I slid the iron deadbolt home with my own hand, and the sound of it, that heavy, final clunk, went through me like something setting right. I sent the recording to Eleanor before the sedan reached the bottom of the hill. Her reply came in under a minute. She just narrated the whole thing. Don't answer her again. Brennan wants to talk. The pharmacy records came back. Detective Paul Brennan was a tired-looking man with kind eyes, and a folder he set on Eleanor's table, like it weighed something. "I've worked these for 11 years, he said. "Want to know the part that never stops surprising me? It's almost never just the money." He opened the folder. "The money's how they get caught, but it's almost never where it starts, and it's almost never where it stops." He laid out the pharmacy records next to the photos I'd taken. The refills had been filled, all right. Picked up, signed for, but the prescriber's records told a different story than the pharmacy's, and the gap between them was where the truth lived. Medication switched for cheaper, weaker versions. Doses that didn't match what the doctor had ordered. A man whose chart said stable, sliding downhill, because what was in his pill box wasn't what the label promised. "The home health nurse," I said. "She came twice, and then the agency wasn't a good fit." Brennan nodded slowly. "A nurse in the house writes things down, notices things." He tapped the file. "Canceling care isn't a crime by itself, but you put it next to forged authority and a drained account and switched medications, and you start to see a person who didn't want any witnesses near the man she was bleeding dry." I thought about Walter saying, "I don't remember signing that." I thought about him getting worse every time the pillbox was reorganized. I thought about a recording on a USB drive, made by an old man who knew exactly what was happening to him and couldn't make anyone believe it. So he hid the proof under a floorboard and trusted that one person would come. "The will fight is Ms. Vance's," Brennan said, standing. "The rest is mine now. There'll be a hearing on the estate soon. That's public, that's separate, but I want you to understand something." He paused at the door. "When this opens up, it doesn't open quietly." The probate hearing was set for a Tuesday in April, in a courthouse that smelled like old paper and radiator heat. Lorraine arrived in the wool coat with a lawyer of her own and a leather folio she set on the table like a trophy. Glenn came with her, gray-faced, sitting where she put him. Brittany came in heels and an expression that said she expected to be somewhere better by lunch. Lorraine's lawyer presented the will from the funeral, the one dated late, the one that gave her everything. Walter Whitlock's last will and testament, he called it, executed in the presence of witnesses, leaving his estate to the woman who cared for him in his final years. Lorraine folded her hands and let her chin tremble, just slightly, for the judge. "I cared for him for years," she said when asked. "This is his last wish. He left it all to me." Eleanor stood up. She didn't raise her voice. She buttoned her jacket like she had all the time in the world. "Your Honor," she said, "which will?" The room went still in that specific way rooms go still when everyone senses the floor has shifted, but no one knows which way yet. Eleanor walked to the clerk and laid down a single document. "This is also a last will and testament of Walter Whitlock," she said, "signed, witnessed, and notarized, 3 weeks before the one opposing counsel just presented. It leaves the estate to his granddaughter, Claire Whitlock. We have the notary. We have both witnesses, who are present today, and prepared to testify that Mr. Whitlock was lucid, unhurried, and alone when he signed it." She let that land. Lorraine's lawyer asked to see it. He read it once fast and once slow, and I watched his face do the thing a face does when it realizes the ground it's standing on belongs to someone else. He leaned to Lorraine and whispered. She shook her head, a tight little no. The no of a woman who has never once been told she couldn't have the thing she decided to take. "The will my opposing counsel presented is dated later. After this one," Eleanor went on. "A reasonable person might ask why a dying man would rewrite his entire estate 3 weeks after settling it, reversing every wish in favor of the one person who held the checkbook." She slid the second will toward the bench. "We have an answer to that question, but it isn't a probate answer, it's a criminal one." Lorraine's lawyer was on his feet. Lorraine's hand had found Glenn's sleeve. That was when Detective Brennan, sitting quietly in the gallery the whole time, stood and walked through the gate and laid his folder on the table beside Eleanor's will. "Detective Paul Brennan, Financial Crimes Unit," he said. He didn't perform it. He just said it, the way you'd read a grocery list, and somehow that made it worse for the woman in the wool coat. He laid the pages down, one at a time. The ledger, 311,000 draining to 4,000. The power of attorney, with a signature a handwriting examiner had already flagged. The pharmacy records, the prescriber's orders beside them, the gap between them spelled out in dates. "The state has opened a criminal case," Brennan said. "Forgery, theft from a vulnerable adult, and the medications—" He set the last page down. "The medications don't match the patient's documented decline. We're still building that piece, but we're building it." Glenn made a sound, a small, broken sound, like a man stepping on a stair that wasn't there. He turned to look at the woman beside him, and I watched my father understand, all at once and far too late, what he had spent 3 years deciding not to see. The judge set the criminal matter aside as outside her jurisdiction and made one ruling that was inside it. The later will was challenged. The estate was frozen, pending the criminal investigation. Nothing moved until it was sorted. Lorraine's trophy folio sat closed on the table. The money was always the part she could explain away. It was everything underneath it that had no explanation at all. I thought it was over in that courtroom. It wasn't, quite. There was one more room it had to happen in, the only room that ever really mattered to Lorraine. That Saturday, her church held its spring charity gala. I knew about it because Lorraine had spent 2 years making sure everyone knew about it. She was being honored that night. The program, which someone forwarded to Eleanor, listed her award in gold letters for years of selfless care of her family elders. That was her whole world, that room. The pews, the committees, the casseroles. The reputation she'd built brick by brick as the good woman who took care of her own. It was the one place she was untouchable. Eleanor and Brennan had a decision to make, and they made the careful one. There would be no recording played for a crowd, no ambush from a microphone, nothing that could taint a criminal case or hand a defense lawyer a gift. Instead, 2 days before the gala, Eleanor delivered a sealed packet to the church's governing board, the elders who decided who got honored and who got quietly removed from the program. Just the facts, the frozen estate, the open criminal case, the forged instrument, delivered to exactly the people whose good opinion was the only thing holding Lorraine's mask in place. I went to the gala, not to speak. Eleanor told me plainly, say nothing, do nothing, let the room do the work. I just wanted to be in it. After a lifetime of being the one sent to the kitchen, I wanted to stand in the doorway of the room where it ended. The hall was full of people in good coats holding small plates. Lorraine was near the front, radiant, working the room she owned. Glenn wasn't with her. Brittany stood by the punch table looking at her phone. I stayed by the door. Eleanor was a few feet away. Brennan was somewhere in the back, a tired man in a gray jacket holding nothing at all. The program started. A man in a blazer went to the podium and welcomed everyone, and thanked the committee. Then he came to the awards, and I watched Lorraine straighten, ready to rise. He skipped her name. He went from the item before hers to the item after, smooth as anything, the way you step over a crack in a sidewalk. No award, no mention, as if the gold letters had never been printed. Lorraine sat half-risen for a second, then lowered herself back down. I watched her understand it. I watched it move across her face in stages, the confusion first, the small frown of a woman certain there's been a mistake. Then the recalculation, the eyes going to the program in her own hand, the gold letters that said one thing while the room said another. Then the dawning. A woman near her leaned in to whisper something kind, the way you do when a friend's been overlooked. Lorraine waved her off too fast, too sharp, and the woman drew back. I saw that register too, the friend's face closing a degree. That's how it happens in a room like that. Not with a scene. With 100 small doors swinging shut at once, so quietly that the person they're closing on is the last to hear them. She looked toward the board members at the head table, and not one of them looked back. They had read the packet. They knew. A man she'd sat beside in those pews for years found something fascinating in his water glass. Another turned his shoulder a few degrees, the universal language of a community deciding you are no longer one of them. And the room she had built her whole self inside, the one place on earth she was untouchable, had closed its door on her, the way you close a door on a cold night, without drama, just a turn of the latch. For 2 years, she had told this room she was the woman who cared for her elders. The room had believed her. And now, the room had read 3 pages and believed something else, and there was no speech she could give that would unread them. She found me by the door. For 1 second, our eyes met across that whole crowded hall. She mouthed something. A name. My name, the start of an explanation. I didn't move. I didn't nod. I just looked back at her with the same flat steadiness she'd given me across a funeral home a season ago, when she smiled and told me to go live with the rats. Then she saw Brennan in the back and Eleanor beside me, and she understood there was no version of the next sentence that helped her. She picked up her purse. She walked out through a side door. Nobody followed her. Nobody had to. Glenn was waiting in the parking lot when I came out. He'd been there the whole time, I think, unable to go in. Claire. His voice was wrecked. I didn't know. I swear to God I didn't. You didn't ask, I said. I wasn't cold about it. I was just done. 3 years of watching his own father drain away while he stared at his shoes. And the worst of it wasn't even the cruelty. It was the choosing not to look. Cruelty, at least, requires effort. He'd just looked away, again and again, because looking would have cost him comfort. That was the choice, Dad, I said. Not knowing, you chose it every time. He didn't argue. I think some part of him had been waiting years to be told. I left him in the parking lot. Brennan walked me to my car and told me quietly that the district attorney had filed the first charges that afternoon. The forgery, the theft. The rest would take longer. These always did. Brittany found me before I reached the car. She'd shed the heels and the lunch somewhere better expression both. You did this, she said, but there was no force in it. It came out more like a question. Mom's going to lose everything. She looked back at the hall, at the side door her mother had vanished through. People aren't returning her calls. The Hendersons uninvited her from Easter. As if that were the tragedy. As if the Easter invitation were the thing that had been stolen. I almost explained it to her. The ledger, the pills, the recordings, the old man checking his own math in pencil. Then I understood she didn't actually want to know. The same way Glenn had never wanted to know. The same way none of them had ever wanted to know anything that would cost them their comfort. So I gave her the only true thing I had. She did this, I said. I just stopped covering for it. I drove home to the mountain. Behind me, I heard later, the fallout did what fallout does. The church quietly removed Lorraine from 2 committees. The neighbors who'd called her a saint started calling her something else. Glenn moved into a rented room by spring. The house was part of the frozen estate now, and the accounts that were supposed to be his cushion turned out to be mostly Walter's money, which meant they were mostly evidence. The family that had thrown me out to protect itself had been built, the whole time, on the thing it threw me out for finding. Then Brennan said one more thing, and it stopped me with my hand on the car door. There's a file at the end of that USB, he said. The last one. You ever listen to it? I hadn't. I'd been so busy with the others, the ones that built the case, that I'd left the last one sitting there. You should, Brennan said. Not for me. The case doesn't need it. He looked up at the dark shape of the mountain. But I think your grandfather made it for you. If you've made it this far with me, you already know I had to drive back up the mountain to listen to it. So before I tell you what Walter said, let me ask you the question I had to ask myself that night. If someone you loved had handed you the truth and trusted you to carry it, would you have driven up the mountain, or would you have looked at your shoes? Tell me honestly, I won't judge either answer. I've been both people. I drove up the next night and built a fire and sat at the table where I'd opened the box, and I clicked the last file. His voice came out steady and slow, and I could hear, underneath it, the small sounds of this same cabin. Claire, if you're hearing this one, then you found all the rest, which means you came up here and you looked under the floor, which means I was right about you. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you while I was alive. I tried. Nobody believes an old man who keeps losing his words. So I stopped trying to be believed and started keeping proof instead. A pause. The fire popped. I checked on her, back at the start, when something first felt wrong. Lorraine. She did this before, to a man named Vernon Pruitt, before she ever met your father. Cleaned him out and walked away, looking like a saint. The saint is the costume. It always was. I couldn't prove it then. I made sure I could prove it now. I closed my eyes. Vernon Pruitt. I would look him up later and find an old obituary, and a man who died alone with his accounts empty, and a grieving caregiver at the funeral who wasn't family and somehow left with everything. No charges, no box under any floor. He'd had no granddaughter who came up the mountain. He'd just had her, and then he hadn't had anything, and the world had called it a sad story about an old man with no one to look after him. She had done it clean once. She had every reason to believe she'd do it clean again. She just hadn't counted on Walter counting. Here's the thing I most need you to hear, so listen. I didn't leave it to you because you earned it. You spent your whole life thinking you had to earn a place at that table, and I watched them let you believe it, and I'm sorry for my part in that. You never served me to be paid. That's how I knew I could trust you with the truth. So I left it where only you would look. Not the useful one, the honest one. There's a difference, and you are the second thing. And you always were. I sat in the firelight for a long time after his voice stopped. Then I went and found the brass key on the shelf where I'd hung it, and I turned the paper tag over in the lamplight, and finally read the 2 words I hadn't understood at the funeral. The 2 words in Walter's blocky hand. Come home. The criminal case is still moving, the slow way these things move. There's been 1 plea on the theft. Restitution ordered, more to come. Eleanor handled the estate. The real will stands. Glenn calls sometimes. I don't always answer, and I've stopped feeling I owe anyone an explanation for which calls I take. I understand my stepmother now. Not forgive, understand, which is a different and colder thing. I understand she was a pattern and not a person, and that my grandfather saw the pattern when no one else would, and that the seeing is the truest thing he left me. More than the money, more than the cabin. I kept the cabin. I could have sold it once the estate cleared. People assumed I would. Instead, I went back to nursing, to hospice work now, by choice, the patients at the very end. And on my off weeks, I started letting their families use the cabin. The husbands and daughters and sons doing the showing up, the staying, the unpaid and unthanked work of sitting with someone while they go. There's no charge. There's firewood stacked by the stove, and a thermos in the cupboard, and the Brant's number by the phone. There was a daughter up here in February, about my age, who'd taken leave to nurse her own dying father, while the rest of her family sent flowers and excuses. I found her on the porch one morning, trying to apologize for crying. I told her the thing I wish someone had told me 11 years ago in a kitchen with a sink full of dishes. I told her the showing up isn't the price of being loved, it's the love itself. It was never something she had to earn her way toward. She looked at me like I'd handed her something heavy and set it down at the same time. I knew the feeling. My grandfather had handed me the same thing, from under a floorboard, after he was already gone. It's 19 degrees out tonight. The gauge by the door says so, the same as the night I first drove up into that freezing darkness with no streetlights. The dark presses on the glass the same way. The trees are the same black shapes past the window, but the firewood is stacked by the stove, where Earl taught me to keep it. And the photograph leans against the lamp where I can see it, and the cabin breathes out heat instead of cold. A little while ago, I went to the door and slid the heavy iron deadbolt home with my own hand. It made the same long, low scrape it made the first night. The difference is everything. That first night, the bolt meant they had shut me out. Tonight, it means I get to choose who comes in. They handed me the cold place to be cruel. I made it the only warm room left. A door can lock you out, or you can be the one holding the key.